Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, June 28th to order at 6 p.m. Hello to everyone watching the live web stream. We hope you're keeping well, and to those who may be watching the recorded meeting at a later date. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and joining me here in the council chamber to my immediate right is Councillor Fellett, to my far right is Councillor Garnett, to my left is Councillor Rintoul. Our three colleagues are joining us via Zoom. You can see them on your screen. Good evening to Councillor Duncan, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor Wainwright. Just two very brief announcements. The first, with BC's restart plan underway, the town's COVID-19 safety plan has been adjusted accordingly. And we are pleased to advise that as of September 7th, subject to the provincial restart fourth phase occurring in the beginning of September, Council Chamber will be open to members of the public. Until that time, Council will continue to ensure transparency and accessibility for the public by allowing the public to submit written correspondence and participate at meetings electronically via Zoom, and by recording and live streaming our meetings. We look forward to having everybody return safely. And to that, after tonight's meeting, we go to summer schedule in July and August. We will have a committee of the whole meeting on Monday, July 12th, and we will have a council meeting on Monday, July 19th. And lastly, I'd just like to pass along that for those who haven't yet heard, that Beacon Community Services have opened the Shoal Centre. It was open today as a cooling centre till 5:30 p.m. and will be open tomorrow from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. The air-conditioned centre is located across from the library on Resthaven Drive. Visitors are asked to respect physical distancing requirements and wear masks. And please spread the word to others who may benefit from the service. We greatly appreciate Beacon Community Services doing this. If you're able, please continue to check in on neighbors, friends, and relatives who may be at risk from the heat. And I hope everyone is keeping safe. I'd next like to move to territorial acknowledgement and respectfully acknowledge that we're holding this evening's meeting in the unceded territory of the Wasanich Nations, the Sartlip, the Sawat, the Sycam, the Pakwachin, and the Malahat First Nations. Turning to our agenda this evening, we have 6 items received since the agenda was made public last Thursday afternoon, and which Council has had the opportunity to review. I'll briefly mention these. We have an additional item from staff under item 5A, the parking and loading bylaw amendments. We have correspondence from a group of Summergate residents under item 6B, the variance request from another Summergate resident. An item of correspondence from H. Kennedy for item 13A, the Allbay Road tree removal request. Correspondence from W. Everson for item 13B, the Jocelyn Place tree removal request. An item of correspondence from K. Armstrong under 13C for the Mermaid Creek item. And the 6th and last item amendment to the agenda is a staff report from our CAO, Mr. Humble, on proposed staff changes, and that will be a new item as 13D. And with those amendments, I would look for a motion to approve, please.
Move approval of the agenda as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll next move to our regular public participation period, and this evening we have 3 speakers and 3 letters of correspondence to be read out. We'll begin with our speakers, and I'll start with our first speaker. If Mr. Armstrong could confirm he's connected, please.
I am connected.
Good evening, Mr. Armstrong. Please introduce yourself, your Sydney address, or who you're representing, and you have the floor for 3 minutes, sir.
Very much. My name is Kyle Armstrong. I'm the restoration coordinator for the Peninsula Stream Society. We were part of the original submission revolving around Mermaid Creek and its restoration, which requested for stormwater management planning from Sidney, as well as closing the trail, the public access to the trail as stated in the bylaw to the Mermaid Creek estuary. Since there's been a staff report, and that's what I hope to follow up on and comment on, if I may. And essentially there were some issues that myself and the Friends of Roberts Bay Committee and Things with Streams, we have some issue with this report. essentially, and perhaps not here to get into, but we felt it was lacking in its assessment of the ecology of the creek and the reasons for erosion. The largest point and to take exception of is the trajectory that it's being set towards a natural state or one that was already originally there. My own personal experience and expertise, I would say this is not the case, and the wording is just problematic as well. The natural state of this creek, what is a natural state? Looking at photos from whether it's 1950 or 1980, modification to the site has already undergone huge dramatic changes. But essentially what we are seeing is a creek chasing its equilibrium, trying to cope with large amounts of upstream stormwater being flushed into it, as well as encroachment on its natural floodplain and changes and modifications to that natural floodplain. And with that, we will see continued erosion of the creek and tidal channel habitat if left unchecked. And that's why we asked Sidney to take a progressive stormwater management planning seriously, one that incorporates and is an integrated approach that looks at capacity beyond just engineering capacities and flood capacities, but also integrates ecological capacities, as well as looking at reusing stormwater, rehabilitating stormwater through incorporation of strategies and tools such as green stormwater infrastructure, green gardens, green roofs, water catchment systems, bylaws that support this and require it for redevelopments. As for the trail, there's sort of a recommendation to kind of take a passive approach on this as well, and not, enforce it and the closure. Maybe just put up some signage and let it be. I would strongly advise against this and not to underestimate the impact that trail is having on the erosion, and really take that seriously and support us in closing that trail to the public to allow for that system to recover, at least give it a chance for different stewardship groups, such as the Friends of Roberts Bay, to get in there and do some stewardship works that could potentially set the trajectory well towards one of recovery for the Mermaid Creek Restoration System in Roberts Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, and for coming before council this evening. And we've also referred, as you may have noted in the introduction, your written correspondence to the item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll next ask Mr. Thierry Bodson to confirm connection, please.
Yes, I confirm connection. Thank you for the time. So on my side, I would like also to refer to this technical note from the engineer of the municipality. And I recognize that the discussion around natural erosion versus natural erosion is an important discussion. I think, but I'm not convinced that the photo of 1969 presented by the engineer is just that photo is proving that much of the material in Mermaid Creek has been added between 1969 and 1980. So I think I found it's very weak as an argument, and I think probably that it's really worth to, see if there is people who with more in-depth expertise in ecological expertise to assess on what is, as mentioned by Armstrong, what's the state, what can be done to improve the balance of this ecological system, and then maybe just investigate also about the origin of the materials. Apparently, it's following the technical team. It comes from from the construction around Mermaid Creek. That could be checked, I believe. And start from there to see what can be done to improve in the future the balance of the system. And I would say that's my addition in that debate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bodson, for speaking to council this evening. We'll turn to our third speaker, Mr. Charles Kirliff. And if you could confirm your connection, please introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Charles Carroll, architect, 977 Port Street. I'm speaking to, I think it's item 6C on your agenda, which is a development variance permit application for 9864 4th Street. And I'll be very brief. In the original design, we always showed fencing along the Sidney Avenue side because it's open to our under building parking. And the intent was always to screen this a little bit, present a nicer face to the street. Unfortunately, it wasn't identified at the time as a required variance. We didn't dimension it. It was kind of our mistake, but there was never any intent to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. It just happened that way. It was also reinforced when we went to APC, and they suggested, and we followed, that we would put a rolling gate or a sliding gate to further enclose that side of the parking lot, which we have done. But it does not meet the regulations of the bylaw for height. It should be 4 feet, which of course from the sidewalk would mean you're not really screening anything. So yes, the intent was always to have that fence a little bit higher to provide a little bit more screening to the vehicles that are sort of parked right there. And that is my summary. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mr. Kirilov, for your remarks to council tonight on that agenda item. I'll now turn to Ms. Nelson.
Hi, Ryan, are you there, Ryan? Oh, yes, please, sorry. Hi, Ryan, are you there? Was he there? Ryan, are you there?
Ryan, you may.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yes, okay. So this is Sandy, and you were advised that you would stay and be here in case council had any questions, but are you wanting to say anything now during public participation regarding the development variance permit application?
No, that's
No?
okay. I'll just stay here for questioning.
No, that's okay. The mayor said that maybe it's best if you just speak to it right now if you had anything to say, and staff would be here to answer any questions if that was all right.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that works.
Okay, okay, thank you. And
Sorry, did you wish to speak then, Mr. Wiley? Okay.
Yes. Sorry, I just got logged in here.
No, that's we're patient.
Yes. So my name is Ryan Wiley. I'm the designer for the project at 2324 Brethour Avenue, and just variance with this. It is a existing single-family dwelling, very small in size originally as it was built, and the purpose for the addition is simply to accommodate the the requirements to age in place, but also to accommodate the two offices that they have. Both the owners are working at home at the moment. And so the addition in itself is essentially a new master bedroom addition to allow the front bedroom to be used as an office. And as you look at the floor plan as well, on page A1.1, there's a secondary office there. So much of our focus in this addition was to observe the privacy of the neighbors and to really focus the attention on the current landscaping in the backyard and focus everything into the main part of the central landscaping of the back deck and the access to their accessory building, which is essentially a little garden area where they do potting and planting and things like that. And then given really the restriction of where the kitchen was and how central it was, we weren't able to push the master bedroom and kind of hide or landlock the kitchen. So a lot of what we were doing was an exercise and kind of a modest to find compromise and everything to work, which we think we've done. And as noted in the development application, we've engaged and talked to all the neighbors and that we're next to, and they're all in support of the addition. And that's all I have to say at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley, for speaking before council tonight and those remarks. I'll now turn to Mr. Humble, who has 3 written submissions to read. Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the first piece of correspondence is from Helen Kennedy, who resides at 10382 Allbay Road. and it's regarding the Garry oak tree removal application for 10382 Allbay Road. She's provided a summary of a submission that she's already made to council that was submitted on June 25th, and I'll read the summary. I note that staff's memo does not include the arborist's recommendation. Quote, the safest course of action is to remove the entire tree. Given the significantly reduced critical compression side roots and resulting root plate movement, this tree can be expected to fail at the root plate under normal regional wind conditions. The target is the house, end quote. On June 5th, I was scared to remain in my house. The winds were a modest 24 to 31 kilometers per hour. However, the root plate of the tree was rising. My neighbor, after witnessing the root plate movement, gave me safe refuge until the winds died down. A quote from the arborist's report with respect to the failure of the pull test. Under normal conditions, there should be no root plate deflection experienced. This is indicative of compromised root plate. This is evidence of the shallow rooting due to high wind water tables and the compromised compression side roots removed for development, end quote. Staff recommend you deny this application in spite of the failure of the pull test, high water table, and exposure to the winds from all directions, the prominent lean of the tree, and extensive canopy over the house. Staff make this recommendation despite the ISA TRAQ certified tree hazard assessor's report, which concludes due to root plate deflection, the tree can be expected to fail at the root plate under normal regional wind conditions. Council members have a duty to manage risk on behalf of the town. Additionally, there is a duty of care to me as a citizen for my safety and welfare. If the town of Sidney denies this application, the town will be precluding me, the homeowner, from doing what is necessary to protect lives and property. By taking such a position, I believe the town would be taking on the liability with respect to the tree. I of June 25th and consider the legal implications if this tree fails and causes human harm and or property damage.
Thank you, Helen Kennedy, for your submission, and we do have the full submission under our agenda, including the photographs that you provided. Thank you.
The second piece of correspondence is from Jocelyn Gifford. The subject is Mermaid Creek Background and Options Public Participation Period. Hello, members of council and staff. Roberts Bay residents has received feedback from a number of residents since we sent the staff report to our mailing list. The concerns are primarily around the discussion, natural versus existing state of Mermaid Creek. One of these residents is the person who took the November 17th, 2020 photographs of the outfall because she was so alarmed by witnessing the churning of the water after a winter rainstorm that came out of the pipe so strongly that it overtopped the height of the culvert. She would be willing to meet with staff on storm volumes coming through the pipe. I would like to encourage council and staff to keep an open mind to the science that will help our community establish a shared vision of what the natural, or in the current circumstances where most of it is storm drain, the healthy state of Lower Mermaid Creek would be. I have expressed my appreciation to Ms. Clary for her work on access to existing trail, although I was hoping that the path would be closed by a physical barrier at the park end. I believe that people will respect the proposed signage. Thanks to staff for their work on this report.
And thank you, Jocelyn Gifford, for your remarks this evening.
Finally, Mr. Mayor, correspondence from Curtis Evans, who resides at 10301 Minogue Place. Hello, this is about the report by town staff on Mermaid Creek. I am of the impression that the report is bogged down in issues with past activities and mapping versus natural environment. The question is not really what is past, but what should it look like in the future. It is sad that there is no natural environment history to compare against, but we then need to envision the future layout without that data. The data presented do not show the full extent of Mermaid Creek, as the drainage is known in the community to be probably as far as Red Wing Place. The probable natural configuration of an estuarine creek in this area should be a high sinuosity tidal stream with profuse wetland borders that would be too swampy to establish trails that need signage. Can the report reflect that as planned future environment? Can we change from a straight ditch to and from a culvert under the park? That might be a bigger endeavor than creating the wetland environment between the playground and the bay, but putting up signs is far less of a recommendation than either. I had hoped that there would be maps of resources for the area from times older than the 1960s, as much of Sidney was already quite industrial by that time. Would there not be some other records, such as maps from the armed forces planning for the army camps during the 2 world wars?
Thank you, Curtis Evans, for your input tonight on the agenda item. That concludes our public participation period for this evening. We'll now turn to presentations. We do have 3, and I'll ask the first 3 presenters from Victoria Airport Authority if they can confirm their audio connection and video, and I'd be happy to introduce your presentation.
Hello, it's Chuck Lavallo.
Is Mr. Lavallo joining us?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we do have a presentation this evening by Geoff Dickson, CEO and President of Victoria Airport Authority, along with Wendy Everson and Charles Lavallo, the town of Sydney's nominees to the VAA Board of Directors, with regards to the Victoria Airport Authority's 2020 annual report. Mr. Dickson, you do have the floor for 10 minutes, and we'd be pleased if you would take questions from Council after your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council. I believe our board member, Wendy Everson, is just going to say a couple of words in advance of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As earlier introduced, Wendy Everson, one of the Town of Sydney nominees. Joining me this evening is my counterpart and other Town of Sydney nominee, Charles Lavallo, who just introduced himself as well. I'm not sure if he's on video tonight. I don't see him. Also, of course, our CEO and President of the Victoria International Airport, Mr. Geoff Dickson, is here this evening as well. In light of understanding the agenda for tonight's meeting is quite long, we would like to stay within the time requirements for this presentation and have decided that Mr. Dickson will lead the presentation going forward. If I could have the next slide, that would be a wonderful start.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. And again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I thought what I'd do, it was a very challenging year for Victoria International Airport in terms of the pandemic, as it was for many businesses, but there was also some very significant accomplishments that we were recognized for, and I think it's important. The first one I'll start with is in terms of financial efficiency. We were named most efficient airport in North America under 5 million passengers, and that's by the Air Transport Research Society, which is headquartered in Geneva. They have a number of academics and students at Embry-Riddle, where they partner with it in Florida to do the analysis. It's pure quantitative analysis of data sets, and this is the 3rd time we've been recognized. So in terms of focusing on being a low-cost, highly efficient airport, certainly helped us very much in the kind of downturn that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Next slide, please. I think it's also important that what you'll see as a theme here is kind of a balanced approach to financial efficiency. Here we were named for the 2nd year in a row one of BC's top 100 employers. An incredible accomplishment, really, when you think about it, especially in 2021, when you're trying to navigate your way through what a virtual office environment looks like and how do you employ the kind of technology and furnishings and outfitting for people to keep everyone connected as a company. Next slide, please. We're particularly proud of this one, where we recognize certainly that people have visible and invisible disabilities. And we set out in terms of the broader expansion of the airport to ensure that we've met the highest standard in terms of overall accessibility. We engaged the Rick Hansen Foundation, and not only did we do the expansion of the airport, we decided to do the entire airport. It spent over a year working with the Rick Hansen Foundation, and very pleased to announce that we were the 4th airport in the country to achieve gold certification in 2020. Next slide, please. So you've looked at various different dimensions. The next thing I'm going to talk to is customer service. And airport service quality is an award that was presented by Airports Council International, and they have members that it's essentially 75% of the world's airport traffic goes through member airports. So you can get the idea of the size and magnitude and the overall level of competition that we're up against. And again, this is purely quantitative. It's input data, individual surveys that are done throughout the world. And we were named best airport in North America under 2 million passengers for overall airport service quality. And a new award, next slide, please, that all of us learned to deal with the world of 2 meter separation and face masks and hydrostatic cleaning and HEPA air filters and all of the various elements. But the Airport Council International Group introduced a new award for best hygiene measures. And that really gets to what did you put in place? How well did you communicate? And how well did your customers understand that? And so again, Little Victoria Airport in Vancouver Island, on the West Coast, being recognized pretty much on a global scale on a number of different metrics. And this one we're particularly proud of is best hygiene measures in North America. Next slide, please. I won't go into this in great depth, but if you look on our website and are interested in understanding what our sustainability plan looks like, we're trying to follow actually the 17 UN global goals, but we have individual measures and metrics not only today, but targets for 2025 and 2030. Things like we plan to be a carbon neutral airport by 2030. We plan to have over 90% of all waste product diverted from the landfill. In terms of water quality and conservation, we're already 40% lower than the individual average at airports per consumption per passenger, and we plan to reduce that a further 25%. And I think many of council members are well aware that we've restored over 1,500 meters of creek on our airport, whether it's Kelset or 1010. And in terms of what we have left to do, we're planning on another 600 meters. Once the financial conditions get a bit better for the airport, we'll be investing there. In terms of social impact, just a quick story I'll share with you. We were donated a small aircraft to our fire hall for firefighting training. And one of the firefighters took it upon himself to salvage the engine and propeller and ended up restoring it, sold it for $17,000, of which $10,000 went to the Peninsula Parkland new track for development, the track and field facility, and another $7,000 of that went to Cancer Society. So certainly really good initiatives and a small grassroots one, which I think are the best kind. Next slide, please. And then finally, in 2020, we completed the single largest capital expansion project we'd ever undertook. And to do that and to get it pretty close to schedule, not fully because of COVID, but to do that in a pandemic with that many trades and incredibly challenging. But I'm sure many of you haven't traveled on an airplane for some time, but hopefully will in the not too distant future, and you'll get a chance to see the new facility. Next slide, please. And that's just an internal shot. That's kind of how it used to look like during the pandemic. We're starting to see, and I'll talk about that in a moment too, a bit of an uptick overall in traffic, but it's a beautiful facility and device. So let's look at the bad news now. So the pandemic arrived, full declaration, middle of March. In April, our business was down 98%. So 2% of what a typical April might look like in 2019. Next slide, please. I think it's incredibly important to understand the overall economic impact of the airport. If you look at the bottom right, that's $880 million, almost $1 billion in overall economic output generated by the flights in and out and all the activity and all the associated businesses downstream and linked to air travel. So you can only imagine when your business goes down 98%, what the broader economic impact might be. We haven't quantified it, but I mean, I can only imagine it's hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I mean, it's significant impact, but I just think it's important to understand that billion-dollar number when things are at a steady state. Next slide, please. So just looking at where we ended up in 2020, we'd been a 2 million passenger airport or thereabouts once in 2018 and almost again in 19. Budget had us just about there, and we ended up at 580,000 passengers, which is quite staggering. And the reason the numbers were, quote, as good as they were was simply because January and February were normal months. Next slide. So you have traffic decreases like that. Our revenue trimmed 23 million on 40. You can't cut costs at that rate. You just simply can't. We slashed operating costs 27%, which is pretty nimble and pretty aggressive, and we achieved that. Capital programs, we cut 50%, unless it was safety related or a project like the lower hold room expansion that was substantially complete, we kept going. In terms of any kind of financial support for an industry that was just gutted, we did receive the CEWS program, and we got rent relief, but effectively rent is based on revenue, so it was really a non-offer. It was a nice gesture, but it amounted to zero savings. We are getting a rent saving in 2021. The federal, I will say the provincial government did step up earlier this year and provided 720,000 for Victoria International Airport, which was certainly well appreciated. And there's another airport relief fund coming out now in a range of about $3 million. So it certainly helps, but it's a far cry from the $23 million in revenue that we lost right off the top. Next slide, please. I won't bore you with the numbers, but just you could see that net income in a budget was 17.2 million, sort of 3/4 of the way down the page in the yellow. And where it ended up, we still managed to turn a small pre-non-cash profit, which I think we're one of the only airports in the country to do that. And it speaks to the efficiency that I've talked about and a little bit about revenue diversification. Next slide. Just showing you what the traffic trends were. We actually saw in the summer, we thought 2020, we were coming out of it. And then as everyone knows, the second variants came. And so we went from 2% to about 28%, 27%, and then back down to 10. And we've been stuck pretty much at 10% right up until June. Next slide, please. I just, where I'm optimistic and where we're beginning to see it, if we look at Canadian airports, we're sitting at 10% or lower throughout the month of May. And if you look at the US airports in the month of May, many of the airports are operating at 100% capacity of where they were in 2019. But overall for the averages, and that's simply because there isn't international traffic, they're ranging anywhere from 50 to 70%. And where they are now is much closer to 90 when you get into June. So, I mean, it tells you that the market will come back fairly quickly. And one of the reasons I'm optimistic is next slide, please. Thank you. Many new carriers, new markets. WestJet has introduced Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and Ottawa service. Flair Airlines is launching Kitchener-Waterloo this July 1st. And Swoop, you may have seen in the paper last week, launching Toronto nonstop service, as well as the Edmonton service they introduced in late May. So what's interesting to me is where we were in 2019, we'd have about 220,000 seats in and out of the airport. We have about 180,000 scheduled now. So it's really going to come back down to passenger demand. Next slide, please. Just quickly, when I walk through land development, some of the things, these are some plots that are under development today. And I think one of the reasons that we've done it is it's in our use plan, but it also helps keep the cost down for the airlines, which drives broader economic activity for the greater Victoria region. Next slide. We have currently a number of developments under construction. Western Canada Marine Spill Response, that will be complete this fall. Next slide. Titan Boats is just about completion, if not in the next days. It's virtually done. That's on site. That's been under construction for the past year. Next slide. And then World Fuels finally got those old tanks out and new ones in. If you've driven by over by the Spitfire Grill, So a number of different developments, and all interesting, all helps keep our fees down. Next slide. Blue Heron Aviation, about to begin construction over on Mills Road, sold out their first plot, took another plot from us, and they're going to be building jointly. So it's exciting to see, and we're already getting more calls about future aviation develop over on the north side of the airport along Mills. Next slide, please. And then finally, York Development. I've talked to council about this at length. Very pleased with the developer coming back, and I mean the number of recommendations that came out of council, whether it was looking at traffic infrastructure, looking at building mass, looking at broader consultation. I think we've addressed all of those in the sense of come down from 22 meters to 11 meters on the side facing the Gallerin residents. We've had open consultation, 120 different mailers were sent out to all the residents at Gallerin. Surprisingly, very little input. I'm sure there's more to come. We're going to be posting traffic graphs so everyone can see sort of time of day pulses, what it looks like on Beacon. In Gallerin, we had the Watts group come back and do some more modeling. We've costed out and engineered what a roundabout would look like and we'll be clearly looking for partnership from others that are involved in traffic generation in the region, including town of Sidney itself. We met with Sidney town staff and Ministry of Transportation and Highways to talk about the F grade intersection. And what's interesting to me, nothing's really changed. I recall a commercial shopping center development we brought to the town, I think 4 years ago, and the recommendations were pulsing in the lights, bit of widening on Beacon, and twinning the left turn lanes, and in both directions. And that, you know, I think those recommendations still stand tall. I think it also is recommendations that perhaps MOTH needs to come back and look at some of the other broader long-term options to address not next year, but the next 20 or 30 years. So consultation's been good. I've had 4 different meetings with staffer, individuals from WSANET, First Nations, good discussions there. We're trying to set up a meeting and get a bit, and that's a broader issue about the airport, and with WSANET First Nations, who also have a table with the federal government, CERNAC. We're trying to set up meetings and have been trying for a while to have York and WSANET, some of the individual staff members to meet and talk, but we'll get that moving. And we've had discussions I've had personally about this development on a higher level and broader sort of airport partnerships in the longer run. So that's been good. I think those were the big conditions that were highlighted. Let me go to the next slide, please. I am concerned about time. So I'll come back and close on air travel. I think we're bullish now. Things are starting to pick up, especially as we move towards July 1. I worry that the airline industry has been gutted in terms of the lack of really financial support by the federal government. The cost of travel remains to be seen, what they'll do. I think business and conference travel, because of technology that we're using today, is going to replace a lot of that. And I think that's going to be the last, but people are going to want to see family and friends. There's a lot of pent-up demand, and then people just have a wanderlust to want to travel. I think the last to come, though, will be business and conference travel. And then what's going to be the state of the economy, and how long is it going to take? Is it the immediate? Certainly the US indicates that. I think in Canada, it's going to take a little bit longer till we get double vaccinated to get fully there. And then just like 9/11, what quantum change will it create in our business? Will there be health passports? Will it be biometric screening and touchless technologies? And so keep your eyes out for that. We're working on all of those, trying to understand what are going to be best practices, lots of ideas, but what will be the things that will be adopted, and certainly make it better in terms of what the travel experience might look like going forward. So that's my presentation, and happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dickson, for the presentation, and to Ms. Everson and Mr. Lavallo. who are also in attendance, and I'll turn to colleagues if you have any questions or comments. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Dickson. Sorry, you've lost your picture, so okay, there you are. Everybody's moving around on the screen. You mentioned the 600 meters of restoration, but you didn't speak specifically to what area that was. Can you speak more to that?
Yes, it would be the picture from effectively West Saanich Road or Pat Bay back up to near the D&D site.
Thank you.
Does that help clarify on 1010?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
And I would be happy to share at some point. We have a master plan developed for the creeks in terms of overall investments, but I'd be happy to share that at some point.
Councillor Keefe, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the report. The thing that I jumped out for me the most that I liked was the Rick Hansen accessibility rating, and I'm really happy to see that. I didn't realize that there's only one other airport in BC and 4 across Canada that have that rating, and I think it's good not only from a social inclusiveness perspective, but also from an economic perspective as well. And accessible tourism is now a tourism market identified by Destination BC. And so, they note that there's 1 in 5 Canadians over 15 that have a disability, and 88% of them are looking to take a holiday every year. And persons with disabilities spend approximately $19 billion in travel every year. So I think there's opportunities for Sidney businesses to take advantage of those opportunities for accessible tourism, and having Victoria Airport Authority having one of the few airports in Canada with that rating really positions us well to take advantage for that. So thanks for that. So I guess what I was wondering is, do you think that there might be any opportunity for collaboration and for marketing or whatever in regards to with YYJ and our chamber and maybe our business, our BIA, to help drive more traffic through the airport and into Sidney? Is that something that might be possible?
No, I think anything's possible. I mean, I've always encouraged, whenever you're talking about tourism, to bring in the Destination Greater Victoria Tourism Group, because they have a little more broader sophistication, a little broader reach. I mean, we didn't go down the road with the Rick Hansen Group from a marketing perspective. We just thought it was clearly the right thing to do. So I haven't really put a lens on it for what opportunity it might create in terms of accessible tourism or that, but I'd be more than happy to further discussion on that subject, certainly.
Great. And also, I wonder if you might want to take this opportunity to maybe comment a bit on airport noise. So being on the noise committee, it's something that I hear from folks frequently, and they need sometimes reminding about how flight patterns around the airport have been impacted through COVID and having to spread smaller aircraft out, and the increase in flight schools and that sort of thing. So if there's any comments you'd like to make on that for the benefit of the community.
Well, no, I'm happy to, and thank you for your participation in the committee. Your input is always appreciated. I think there's been a few dynamics with COVID. Is that proportionately there's been much more of the small aircraft flying schools doing circuits. I mean, effectively, their business is the same or better than it was in 2019, and has been fairly strong throughout 2020 and into 21, and against the backdrop of much fewer commercial flying, you tend to notice it more. So we've seen a bit of a spike in complaints there. We've also seen a diversion of more aircraft coming from the Lower Mainland. from Boundary Bay and coming over into the circuits and the like. But I think those are the main issues. In terms of the military noise has been less because there's been fewer deployments. But I think that's overall. Did I capture what you were thinking, Councillor?
Yeah, mostly. And I guess one question I've had recently from folks is, do we expect the pattern to change? Like once we get commercial aircraft moving in again, so do you anticipate that the pattern for those smaller aircraft will change? I always get people asking me.
I think there'll be fewer diversions. I'd have to defer to NAV Canada on that. But in terms of the circuits itself, they won't change. They won't change materially from where they are today.
Right. Okay.
And they haven't changed materially. It's more the introduction of others.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That's all.
Welcome.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, Mr. Dickson, thank you again for the excellent presentation, and congratulations on the significant and wide-ranging recognition you've received for the various activities at the Airport Authority, and congratulations also on the success of implementing safety measures, the efficiencies and cost reductions necessary to be in a financial position, I think, readies you for the release of the pent-up demand for future travel. And thank you to Ms. Everson and Mr. Lavallo for the work you do on the VA board on behalf of Sidney residents as our nominees to the VA board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll now go to our next presentation. I'll ask Mr. Bill Collins to confirm his connection, and I'll be pleased to introduce his presentation.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much.
We just have one question first, Mr. Collins. What underwater breathing apparatus are you using?
Yeah, it's a self-contained underwater breathing apparatus.
We're pleased to have Mr. Bill Collins, Chair of Cascadia Seaweed, and his presentation on the Blue Economy Strategy. Mr. Collins, you have the floor, and be pleased if you take questions after your presentation.
Sure will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors and residents of Sidney who are watching in tonight. I want to say thank you. We're coming to you from Sidney, of course, West Saanich First Nation, but I also like to acknowledge the fact that our newest office is in the territory of the Coquitlam. We have offices in the Wewakam and Sashot territories and farms in the Clahoose and Uchucklasit and Hawaiiat First Nations up and down the coast of Vancouver Island. Ladies and gentlemen, my goal tonight is to tell you about the blue economy. We just completed a report and submitted it to Fisheries and Oceans on behalf of 16 signatories, including mayors and council from some regions, practitioners and First Nations. Collectively, we believe there is tremendous opportunity and with it hope for a revitalization of coastal communities in British Columbia and beyond in Canada. And Sidney by the Sea is at the forefront of at least the North American global opportunity. So my goal tonight is to leave you with some ideas about how it might manifest itself, and then I'll tell you a little bit about a recent festival that we had here, which we approached council with some ideas last year, and perhaps leave you with some ideas for the future. So make no mistake, the blue economy is here, and it was a term that we really only discovered over the last couple of years. What it speaks to is an ability to, under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, extract resources and generate wealth from the ocean in a way that's in harmony with the planet. So we speak quite often of sustainable. Well, I'm here to say sustainable is no longer valid. We have to regenerate. We have to put back into our oceans more that we are taking out. And we hope to demonstrate as Cascadia Seaweed that we're on the fore of a new type of industry. I can remind everybody that infants that are born tonight will likely see the turn of the next century. So when you realize the stark requirement that we have for time to deliver. It's very late in the game. We must do it right now. And that's what our message is. First and foremost was to our federal government and our provincial governments, but the real action will take place in the municipalities of British Columbia and on the East Coast and the North. So that's why I wanted to bring this to you tonight. We possess in Canada all the fundamental elements to experience and grow seaweed. It is a source of economic, social, and environmental revenue. It's really important to recognize that this industry in British Columbia could generate $1 billion a year. Now, in general, aquaculture speaks to perhaps $15 billion per annum. Globally, in North America and British Columbia specifically, maybe 1.2 to 1.6 billion, depending on who you ask. Cascadia Seaweed is coming to the fore with the third leg of that aquaculture tripod. Finfish aquaculture being one leg, shellfish aquaculture, and of course, seaweed aquaculture. 91% of Canadians say climate change is a serious issue. Even our own Prime Minister has signed on to a report from a high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, which has as one of its recommendations to scale up environmentally responsible commercial farming of seaweed and algae. When you have investment partners such as the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy, we know we're in the right game. And when I say right game, I mean an ability to rejuvenate coastal British Columbia. And as I mentioned before, Sidney is at the forefront of this. So for example, over the last 2 years, Cascadia Seaweed from 3rd Street, our offices here in Sidney, we've accepted more than $2.5 million of investment, which is going to be deployed from this as the headquarters. We're in the market now looking for substantially more and expect to bring in more than $20 to $30 million over the course of the next 2 years. Again, this capital to be deployed out of Sidney, but to the benefit of coastal BC in general. Just this past week, we've had occasion to speak on the phone, as another example, to Paris, Tokyo, Amsterdam, and Cape Town. And recently, we have signed an MOU with the state government of South Australia, all in an effort to bring to the fore opportunities in the blue economy. The blue economy and seaweed cultivation, as we move closer to home, apart from the fact that we are action central here in Sidney, you will be seeing within the next 2 years, and I guess even sooner than that, seaweed farms right off in our coastal waters here off of Sidney. Did you know that once upon a time, a couple of decades ago, one of the most lucrative seaweeds was exploited commercially in Puget Sound? One of the best places in North America to grow nori is right off our shores here. And nori commands a price of about $250 a kilo wet. So we're not talking about lame change here. We're talking about important economic opportunity if we exploit it correctly. I know we get asked quite often, well, what's the impact of growing seaweed? Well, first of all, we don't want an entire commercialization of our coastal zone. It's too important for us. However, if we do it responsibly, we can generate a really low impact on our coastal environment. It's not like we're putting rafts in or other big infrastructure. These are low impact infrastructure. And we're attracting investment not only to scale up the technology, because ultimately technology will mitigate as much as we can impacts on our coastal zone, but we need to scale up and support infrastructure in harmony with things like cetaceans, which are very important. So Cascadia is investing in the science and engineering to be able to deploy this business venture in harmony with the coastal peoples and the critters and algae and plants that live in our ocean. Bottom line is we are at the fore. It will be coming to Sidney. In fact, it is here now in our recent Seaweed Festival. It was virtual, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because it was tremendously oversubscribed. We had 650 people register. We had over 1,500 people participate in the various events through the 7 days of Seaweed, most of which have said if there was an opportunity to come to Sidney to participate in person, we would be there. So get ready, Sidney. Next year, with COVID willing, we'll have chefs from all over Canada come to cook our favorite product, which grows right off the shore here in near Sidney. So the bottom line is, we have an opportunity. We're exploiting the opportunity. It's good for us in Sidney. It's good for coastal communities. It is a critical piece in support of UNDRIP and the wealth generation and revitalization of our First Nations brothers and sisters. It's really, really important that we support economic development in these smaller communities, and we can do it from right here. I would like to propose at some point that, and I will be coming to council, we propose that Sidney, by the sea, could be the seaweed capital of North America and bring with it dozens of tourists, eco-tourists. People like to see climate action in action, and we can demonstrate that with the farms that we expect to be seeing off our shores here. So we can deliver this, we will deliver this, and with the support of council and the people of Sidney, we can make this an excellent opportunity of hope to bring forward as new hope in a changing business environment where people and planet are at the fore, and profit enables prosperity as opposed to be driven from the profit perspective. So that's what I'd like to say tonight, and I would happily entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, and I'll turn to colleagues if they do have any comments or questions. Okay, well, that was an excellent presentation. We appreciate the package that you submitted as well. That's included in our agenda package. Thank you for your update on the rapidly evolving blue economy. We certainly appreciate that. Thank you for your leadership and putting Sidney on the international map in a new way, and in such an environmentally, I'm not going to say sustainable, but rejuvenation of our BC coast. And we certainly look forward to your future creative and initiatives, including what an in-person Seaweed Festival might look like in 2022. Thank you, Bill Collins.
Okay, thanks very much. Check out CascadiaSeaweed.com for the full Blue Economy report. Bye for now.
Bye-bye now. We'll turn to our third presentation this evening, and that is item 4C3, Development Variance Permit Application Number DP 100822 for 10474 Resthaven Drive. And I should ask that Mr. Will Peereboom confirm his connection as I'm introducing your presentation.
He's just connecting now, so maybe say that again, just to mention his name.
Okay. We can see you, Mr. Peereboom. Can you possibly unmute?
Nope. Just sitting outside here trying to stay cool.
Good for you. And I've just introduced your presentation, sir, and you do have the floor, and we'd be happy if you would take any questions council may have afterwards.
Okay, this is a project on Resthaven. My client, Dallas Rudd, has been involved with a development permit on townhouses to the basically to the west of this lot. This is a lot to the east of the two lots that he's currently developing. We're proposing 8 townhouses on it, and we'll be using a shared driveway through an easement from the property to the west. Again, these are very typical to the townhouses that we do have already been in for a development permit. They're basically 3-story townhomes with garages in the basement. In the lower floor. As you will notice, the garages are a bit oversized. This will allow for storage of refuse, recycling, bikes, and a vehicle. The garages being about 14 feet wide versus the normal 10. These are 3-bedroom units upstairs with, or 2 bedrooms upstairs with a den on the main, and some of it are a den on the lower floor, den or slash bedroom. And then living room, dining room, kitchen on the main floor. So there's 2 bedrooms on the top floor, living room, dining, kitchen on the main, and a slash bedroom den on the ground floor or the basement in some cases. Again, these council has seen these these units in the past based on the other development permits. So I'll just open it up for council to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peereboom, and I'll turn to colleagues if they do have any questions. I'll first turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Peereboom. I recall with the last development, there was an issue with stairs, the front stairs coming down to a patio in the adaptable units, which meant that the someone with a mobility issue would have to go out through their, take the elevator down to their garage and then find their way around to the front of the house to access their front patio. And that was an issue of concern. Has that been rectified in this design, or is it the same design?
It is the same design. And again, we don't anticipate that someone would be looking to purchase these units if they were already disabled or in a wheelchair. It would be someone that would develop some mobility issues, let's say getting older. I think if you're in this type of unit, once you're fully in a wheelchair, you'd probably move to something a little different than this type of project. So it's really not marketed for that type of market in the sense of having someone move into it that's already disabled. It would be somebody that has developed some mobility issues in the future. And again, I don't, and as I stated before, I have a grandson who's disabled and in a wheelchair full time, and this is obviously wouldn't be something they would even consider to purchase for his needs. So yes, I do agree. It is a bit of a, not the best scenario, but it is what is working for this site.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll just say again how disappointed I am at that, and that I think we have to start changing our mindset and making assumptions about where persons with disabilities, that assuming that, well, they're not going to want to live there. Well, they're not going to live there if they can't get, have equal access to all parts of their property. So that's a concern. The parking, I guess, that's provided, you mentioned that the garages are a little bit bigger. How does that translate to the guidelines for accessible parking that you would normally see in other jurisdictions?
Well, an accessible parking stall is normally 12 feet wide or 3.5 meters, and we're at approximately 14 feet inside our garages. So we actually exceed that. So
Okay.
These garages could work for both a side dismount or a rear dismount type van.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Peereboom. Two questions, if I may. The first one, so if this proposal goes ahead and you have 23 units in there, am I assuming that I'm seeing correctly that all access and exit points for all vehicles would be in that same drive at 10478 Resthaven?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, I was wondering if there was any thought given to reducing the size of the proposal to, say, 6 units or even 7 with 4 in the front and 3 in the back. And the reason I say that is I was wondering because that would allow for the retention of the cypress protected tree that's in the back left corner of the lot. Was there any thought given to that at all?
Honestly, no. We basically were looking at sort of maximizing the amount of units, again, just keep the price point down as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Looking to see other questions. I see no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Peereboom, for your presentation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Peereboom, if you'll recollect, certainly through the Advisory Planning Commission and from staff discussion around similar developments concerns with regard to recycling and garbage. What consideration with respect to this element have been taken into this next proposal that you're bringing forward?
Well, again, as we've noted on our plans, we are proposing to just have the garbage and recycling be picked up through a private thing at the garages. And so there's area to store in the garages, and on the pickup days, a garbage can or recycling will be placed just outside the garage door. There's about a 4-foot wall where they can be placed against, and a private contractor can pick them up.
And with this particular development, then, less concern about turning radius for those vehicles, is that correct, Mr. Peereboom?
Exactly, because right now you end up with a T-shaped intersection at the base of the driveway. So that makes it far more maneuverable. So a vehicle can pull in, pull up, and then back into the other part of the T and then pull back out. So rather than just having a driveway that comes down and turns this way, now you have a driveway that turns and go here, back up, and then come back out.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Thank you, Mr. Peereboom, for your presentation and taking questions. It will come up shortly as an agenda item on our agenda. Thank you. So we'll next turn to bylaws. We have bylaw number 2217, our amendment number 4, our off-street parking and loading bylaw, and I'll turn to staff. We have had some additional information which we mentioned during approval of the agenda, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this proposed bylaw amendment would update some key sections of the off-street parking and loading bylaw. It's essentially unchanged in its intent since the last time council reviewed it earlier this year. And largely it deals with amendments to the pay and lieu provision in the bylaw. It brings in a new accessible parking regulation, a new standard for electric vehicle charging, and makes some minor amendments to bicycle parking requirements. So since council has seen this last, it was reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission, and they did have some very helpful comments that staff took into account and have into the bylaw. One of those changes was to clarify that accessible parking requirements in the bylaw do not apply to single, two-family, and secondary suite dwelling units. That was part of the bylaw previously, but wasn't quite as clear as I think it could have been. So that's been updated. Also clarified that signage for accessible parking does not apply in a situation where you'd have essentially a private garage, such as in the case of the development that's just been discussed previously to this. So obviously no other people would be using that parking space, and signage isn't required there. So that was clarified. And then some minor amendments as well to a graphic in the bylaw, just to adjust the numbering on one of the dimensions, and as well just some wording changes to make the bylaw overall more consistent in referring to certain types of dwelling units, etc. One change that's happened since APC as well is the suggestion from Councillor Garnett that an accessible space be required below developments with 10 dwelling units, so from 1 to 9. Originally, staff had put in one required accessible space in the type A parking space, which is a 3.7 meter wide space plus a 1.5 meter accessible aisle next to it. And staff have changed that to the type B space, so it's a 2.7 meter wide parking space with the 1.5 meter accessible aisle next to it, and that's a total of about 4.2 meters in width and 13.75 odd feet, something like that. So that's one change, and that's sort of the intent there is to sort of create a graduated requirement from that smaller type of development, a little more flexibility for those small developments that maybe don't have as much room to work with, and go up from there to a larger type of development. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that overview. So I just wanted to confirm, mainly for the community, that this bylaw, you know, if it's passed tonight, is in effect as of now. And so I want to confirm that any development that has started up in the last 2.5 years, since December 2018, when accessible parking came out of the building code. So am I correct in understanding that any development that has put in their application prior to today would not have any accessible parking requirements?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, this bylaw would apply, once adopted, would apply to any building permits issued since the adoption of the bylaw.
Okay.
So it would, we may have some applications right now that are just development permits, but the bylaw actually applies to when something is proposed to be built, and that would be through the building permit process. So yes, after it's adopted, any building permits that we issue would be subject to the bylaw requirements for sure.
Okay, so, but I just want to clarify, been issued probably in the last year or so, that or maybe under construction, and so they won't have any accessible parking, or have you found that there's a practice that have we been recommending that, well, it's not really required, but it's a good idea? How have those sorts of decisions been handled?
I believe that some developments have built accessible parking of their own accord. However, the bulk of what's under construction right now was approved previous to the change in the building code, I believe. So a lot of what's happening right now is built under the previous accessible parking requirement, which is much fewer number of spaces required, but I think most developments do contain a certain number of spaces. Allison, do you want to add anything to that?
Through the mayor to council, that is the case, that some of the developments under construction right now were not required to install any handicap accessible parking spaces, but are doing it of their own accord.
Okay, so that's good to know. And also, I guess, good to communicate to the public if they see that there's what they perceive to be a shortage of accessible parking. According to the new bylaw, it could be that that building permit was issued prior to that. So, okay, I think I've got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you to staff. Seeing no further questions, so we can proceed this evening through 3 motions through 3 readings.
I'll move that bylaw number 2217, off-street parking and loading, amendment 4, be given first reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke previously with respect to the issue of payment in lieu, and certainly recollect the Advisory Planning Commission had some similar discussion on that subject, and we're unable to reach consensus with regard to what might be the best path forward. I would like to move an amendment with respect to that item, that the pay in lieu sum $15,000 to $20,000.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
A second, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the increase is in keeping with the conversation at APC, certainly, and personally, I find that amount more appropriate than the lesser amount of $15,000 that's being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler, would you like to speak?
No, I would just like to concur with what Councillor Rintoul. I feel that the larger amount would be the better way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I agree with the proposed increase. When I talk to people who are in the construction industry with multifamily developments, parking spaces cost a whole lot more than 20,000. So 20,000 is still what I think is seems to be a fairly reasonable amount. So I'm in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm willing to support the amendment, but a note of caution that the pay in lieu had previously been a high amount, and previous councils had a lot of proponents coming forward arguing essentially about hardship and requesting variances, to the point where that became the norm as opposed to the payment in lieu, because the payment in lieu was so much. And just that, you know, we should not allow that to repeat. If there is in fact an issue with the pay in lieu being too high, we shouldn't be giving variances. We should be reducing the pay in lieu. So I'll go on record that if that starts to happen, that would be the outcome I would be looking forward to. But I would support the motion tonight, as long as we don't start handing out variances.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright, and I'll concur with that, and as well as previous speakers, and support the amendment. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call those all in favor of the amendment. Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Duncan. The motion passes. We're back to the main motion. We had no further discussion. Sorry? Sorry, yes, we're calling the motion as amended. All in favor? None opposed. Sorry, opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
And I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to development permits and development variance permits. And the first is item 6A. We had a presentation regarding development permit application number DP 100822 at 10474 Resthaven Drive to construct an 8-unit multifamily residential development. A report from staff, and we do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that development permit application number DP 100822 at 10474 Resthaven Drive be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Discussion? We have Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. A question, Mr. Mayor, through you to staff, in regards to the requirements for the adaptable units. So I understand there's specific part of the BC Building Code that deals with that. And I know when our building inspectors go out, they'll look at the electrical and the plumbing and the drywalling and all those other things. And I'm wondering, do they also look to confirm that adaptable units comply with what is in the building code for adaptable units, or do we leave that to the developer to just do that?
Ms. Verhagen.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, we use the Town of Sidney's zoning bylaw requirements for adaptable units in Section 7 of zoning bylaw 2015. So when the building inspectors do inspections, they do look for those things in the units. We also look for them on the plans when we check the plans for the development permit application. So they are looked for to make sure that they're there to meet the zoning bylaw requirements.
And a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Certainly.
So I believe that there was some updates to the building code guidelines for adaptable units in 2020. So would that supersede our what we have in our 2015, or requirements, or do you know, or are they the same or different?
My understanding is the buildings have to meet the building code, and they also need to meet the zoning bylaw requirements. So I can't say offhand what the differences are between the two sets of requirements, but they do need to meet both.
Okay, thank you for that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Oh, sorry, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll support the recommendation, but there are just three things that I want to bring up with my colleagues. As you may all recall, we approved a development 10490 Resthaven just up the street from it, and that is an example of what I want to see in that neighborhood. It really fits really well. And of course, we approved this one and the subsequent second one, and now having seen them built, we had a resident send an email in saying that they were unhappy with the massing, and I can actually now understand, having been there the other day again, that they are large, and we're talking about 23 homes going on to three single family lots, and it is quite imposing on the street, I have to be honest. Looking at it, it's a bit overwhelming, and to me it actually doesn't really fit with the neighborhood. Unfortunately, it's just the way it looks now for me. Around the parking, and I know we've talked about this a few times, and it's great that now the trucks can make the turn they want if they have the T there, but I was looking at 3-bedroom townhomes and thinking there's 23 units. There's bound to be many people in there that have more than one vehicle. There's not any room for them to go anywhere in there. Visitor parking, there's none. We're talking about potential for a lot of vehicles being added to on-street parking, and in that particular area, I've been there several times, multiple days of the week, multiple times of the day, and it's well used. There's a lot of on-street parking, and the reason I bring that up is because we have in our future plans to put bike lanes up and down Resthaven on both sides, and I'm wondering how that's going to play with that. Are they not allowed to park where the bikes are? If they park there, the cyclists now have to go into traffic, and the safety concerns that's going to bring forward. And the last point I just want to make was I touched on with the tree, and it's a prime example. Ironically, today, the hottest day I can ever remember living here in my whole time, and I'm thinking about how a tree like that cypress provides relief in the shade, what there is of it not having direct sun on you, and what value those kind of trees have in our community. And it just makes me feel sad to think that we would have to cut trees down like that to provide developments and provide homes when I consider just how valuable a tree such as that is to our community. So those are just things I thought of as I was standing there looking at the site the other day, and actually the multiple times I visited, and just wanted to share that with council for their consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Two things came out of the presentation this evening from the architect, and one was in regards to the conversation for the adaptable units, and when Councillor O'Keefe asked about the adaptable units and accessing different parts of the property, and the response was that this was not for someone who was dealing with a disability. It was they probably wouldn't choose to go and purchase this property. So just a thought came out of this that we're appeasing a need. I shouldn't use the word appeasing. We're meeting the needs of our community and saying that we have to have adaptable housing, and the developers are building to that, and yet we're hearing that yes, this is adaptable, but it's not necessarily going to be for someone who really needs it. Yet we've installed an elevator into it, or made room for an elevator. So I'm sort of wondering how much of our community's needs we are achieving to build something that from the outset is recognized it's not going to be as usable for an adaptable unit as we may think it is. And the other part of it, as Councillor Garnett just talked about with the tree, and the other part that comes for me is the architect says, well, maximizing the lot size. And I can understand that from an owner. Of course you want to maximize your lot size. But we're also looking in the town of tree preservation. We've got 2 trees on this property that come under the tree preservation bylaw, and there's a request to remove them, and the likelihood is we approve this and those trees are going to come down. We are continuing to densify Sidney, and the space that is becoming denser, more populated and more built out are lots that used to have and have landscape trees, trees that are meant to be on acres in large fields. And we're giving up those trees. And here we are in a hot spell right now, which, as unique as it is, may be what climate action is going to, or what's happening with our climate is going to be a more frequent occurrence. And we're going to take down 2 trees that provide shade so that we can build more houses. So I think at some point, I'm not going to deny this application to move forward. I'm going to support it. But these are 2 nuggets that come out of there that we need to think about what it is we're doing if we're densifying our town, and yet on the other side we're saying we need to preserve trees, the very trees that don't survive in a highly built up environment. How do we deal with that? Do we turn around and say maybe we shouldn't be densifying our municipality and making smaller lots, or do we go really quickly and plant trees in public space to make up for that loss? I don't know the answer. I'm not looking for the answer here tonight, but I just wanted to bring that forward for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on the main motion. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll next turn to item 6B, which is Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100304 for 9348 Village Way, which is in the Summergate Village. Councillor Fallon.
Mr. Mayor, that is my strata, and just to remove any issue of conflict, I will remove myself from this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. We'll first ask for a staff introduction and then go to questions. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this application is a variance request for a relaxation of the requirement in the Summergate land use contract related to maximum lot coverage. The applicant is looking to increase maximum lot coverage in order to add a covered sun deck to the property. It would increase it from the maximum lot coverage of 35% up to 43%. The rationale is given in the staff report and also attached in the agenda package. So please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick one. In regards to the Summergate land use contract compared to our normal bylaw. So Summergate land use contract is going to come to an end soon, and I'm just wondering, are the requirements for lot coverage significantly different between what is allowed under the Summergate land use as opposed to what would be allowed under our bylaws once they convert, or is it the same?
That's a good question. Thank you. I'm just looking that up as we speak here. And if you've got a minute, I will keep looking at that. It's the R4 zone, which doesn't apply to any properties currently, but would apply, as you said, in June 2024 when the land use contract is lifted from title. So just as a comparison, while I scroll here and look that up, the single and 2 family zones in Sidney, most of them allow 40% lot coverage for single story dwellings. And these are all single story dwellings.
Okay.
Almost got it here, but it is comparable. The 43% is slightly higher than what is permitted for single-story dwellings elsewhere in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. We do have a recommendation.
I'll move the staff recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters or 246 feet of 9348 Village Way be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV100304 to increase the maximum lot coverage from 35% of the mobile home strata lot to 43% to allow for a covered sun deck, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? I just want to add that part of the additional correspondence we received today's agenda was a letter from signed by 8 residents of the Summergate Village, some immediate residents to this particular applicant, and nearby residents who said that they have no concerns or objections to this variance. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll just invite Councillor Fallett back to the meeting. Welcome back. We'll now turn to item 6C, which is Development Variance Permit Application number DV100305 at 9864 4th Street. We did have a presentation, a speaker during public participation earlier this evening to relax maximum fence height for a multifamily residential development. Turn to staff for a brief introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the applicant indicated for this one, the variance is to the zoning bylaw requirement for maximum fence height in the exterior side yard. Staff's reasons for supporting the variance are given in the report, in that it's not at property line, it's set back a distance from the property line, but still within the area of the private property that's called the exterior side yard. It doesn't run the full length of the property, it's kept towards the west side of the property. It is visually permeable in its design. It doesn't present a flat wall to the public, so it does complement the design of the building. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'll first turn to questions from colleagues. Seeing none, we have a recommendation.
I'll move the staff recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9864 4th Street be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV100305 to increase the maximum exterior yard fence height to 1.9 meter, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Have it moved?
A second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't support this recommendation. I would have been happy just to deny the variance request for the reason that this is an experienced developer, not comfortable with people who should know the rules, building something that aren't within the rules and then coming back after and asking for sort of a pass, so to speak. And also given the past history of this lot with trees that had to be removed because of improper care, I don't feel like I can support this at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. Councillor Garnett, the motion carries. Thank you. We'll turn to item 6D, which is Development Variance Permit Application number DV100306 at 2324 Brethour Avenue. We had remarks through public participation this evening to relax interior side setback requirement for an addition to a single-family dwelling. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the applicant indicated earlier, this is a request to vary the required side setback for the west side, the west interior lot line side of an existing single-family dwelling. The existing house is built at a reduced setback, but that's legal non-conforming. It was there before the bylaw regulation was in place. So they're proposing to add on to the house at the rear of the property, maintaining that line of structure. So to do so, that's what requires a variance. The applicant also submitted letters of support from the neighborhood for the requested change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Any questions from colleagues? We have a recommendation.
I'll move that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters or 246 feet of 2324 Brethour Avenue be notified regarding development variance application number DV 100306 to vary the required minimum side interior setback, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank the speaker earlier and the proponents here. I usually like to do site visits, and it was really hard to see what they were talking about from the street. So I really appreciate the package and the pictures and all the designs that were offered with this, and the effort that they made to contact their immediate neighbors and to reach out to make sure it was okay with everybody. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. We'll next turn to adoption of minutes from our regular council meeting of June 14th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Next turn to my mayor's report. I'll be brief this evening. You do see appended to the agenda the CRD board highlights of June 9th. I have no highlights above the report. The only other item I'd like to speak to briefly is I was pleased to join our Sydney Sister Cities Association members in conjunction with the Anacortes Sister Cities Association and Anacortes Mayor Laurie Gear in celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Sydney and Anacortes Sister Cities relationship. It was a great evening, and it was notable for the remarkable photographic record that both organizations have over the 25 years, and each organization, and congratulations to Sydney Sister Cities Association President Sharon Stoneman and her counterpart in Anacortes for the excellent presentations they gave of some of the many events that have occurred over the past 25 years that connect our two communities in many ways. And we certainly look forward to, we have had previous updates to council that as it stands today, Washington State Ferries is does have in their plans, subject to our national government's reopening the borders, to look to resume the Sydney Anacortes ferry run sometime in the fall, but there'll be further information provided as restrictions change. That concludes my report. We have no council reports this evening. And so that we'll now turn to committee reports, and I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, our liaison to the Emergency Planning Committee, and the minutes of their April 21st meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move receipt for information of the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments, Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I think they're pretty self-explanatory.
Thank you. I'll call a question. All in favor? And none opposed. That motion carries. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, along with myself, members from council on the OCP Review Advisory Committee, and our minutes of our June 22nd meeting.
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Second. Any comment?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yep. No, thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I agree. I only want to very briefly comment that I asked that the video of the meeting be appended to this evening's agenda. I thought the presentation we had from our new Climate Action Coordinator, Ms. Kira Gilmare, was an excellent presentation, and invite the public to access it. Took up the majority of our meeting, and I think is a great introduction to having that new position, and as we move forward with climate action in our new OCP. With that, I'll call a question. All in favor? And none opposed. The motion carries. We're turning to staff reports now, and we do have the tree removal request of a Garry oak tree at 10382 Allbay Road. We had a speaker this evening who's also submitted additional information, a report from staff. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Sorry, just before you proceed,
So
Ms.
this tree removal application was first presented to council in March 2021. At that time, council made a motion to table it and bring it back in June 2021. So the property owner did have a arborist review the tree again and perform a pull test. Staff did re-inspect the tree again today to see if there was any evidence of root lifting. There was none visible, but it doesn't happen. It's just staff still don't have, firsthand evidence of this tree requiring removal. So we are recommending that it be denied.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So my understanding is that so they did the pull test, and the pull test indicated that the root plate is compromised, but staff weren't in attendance at that when that procedure was taking place. So I guess you can't really comment one way or the other whether it was done accurately or in accordance with the regular sort of standards. Any comment on that at all?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe. So as indicated in the report, the pull test was done in the opposite direction. So it was pulling the tension roots where the arborist report alleged that the compression roots were cut. So, I think agriculture is something that people do differently, and it just wouldn't have been the same method that the town's arborist would have used.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, we do have the recommendation from staff. Look to council proceed.
I'll move that the matter be lifted from the table.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move that the application to remove a Garry oak tree at 10382 Allbay Road be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Discussion, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I certainly appreciate the time and effort and the insight provided by staff. I've viewed this through the lens of Mrs. Kennedy and the concerns that she's cited, but also the effort that she's put in to having this addressed to the requests that this council put forward, which included at personal expense to herself and her time and effort and concerns being extended for the safety of herself and property, just due to the relationship of this tree and how it's growing and overhanging her home. But we asked that an updated arborist report be provided and a pull test be completed prior to bringing the matter back to council. That was done, and the arborist report expresses ongoing concern that the root plate is compromised. And so I'm not in a position to suggest anything other than I'd like to respect the wishes of this homeowner and alleviate her concerns again for her personal property and her safety, and respect that she's gone through the process that council asked her to. So I'm comfortable, although obviously concerned that we're removing a mature tree, but that in this case I'm satisfied that there's enough concern given the types of inclement weather that we're experiencing in such as Allbay Road, that this tree potentially poses a risk to Mrs. Kennedy. So I'm going to support obviously the motion that I put forward here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to the seconder before going to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I looked at this long and hard, and as my earlier comments regarding our smaller properties and the types of trees that we have on it, and I looked at where this, as much as we could, because it's not that visible from the street. But reading the report, and both the previous report and the current report tonight, and looking how the tree is situated on the property and the proximity to the home, and as Councillor Rintoul has said, the homeowner, I believe, has done due diligence and responded to our requests to do the various tests. And as much as I don't want to see a tree come down, I have to say that when there is a need, and I think this one qualifies as a need, and I'm going to support this motion to have the tree removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fellett. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I confess I'm reluctant to vote in favor of the motion, but I'm going to, because it looks pretty black and white, really. We've got a report by a certified arborist, and the arborist has the hazard tree assessment certificate, and you know, there's a pretty strong recommendation to take it down. I don't think we can really ignore that, so I'm going to be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. What sometimes I find difficult with the arborist reports in different cases that we've looked at is you can get different opinions from different arborists. When I look at this one, I agree with staff that just the because there's pest activity, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an unhealthy tree. The lean in the tree was there when the individual bought the house, so I'm not really convinced of that as being an issue. And there's an allegation that maybe root damage was done, but there's no evidence of that. Having said all that, I think it's, as has been, you know, we asked the homeowner to go and get a pull test. They got one done. The arborist says that the root base is compromised. And so I'm putting a fair amount of stock in that. I also look at the trees that were taken down, bigger trees for another property just down the road at Allbay. And we approved those because we were concerned about the damage that might be done with the roots. I'm not sure what was going on a few years ago when this house was built that we allowed a tree to be so close to the house to be built so close. But as my colleagues say, I lean towards going ahead and approving the taking down the tree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I am also regrettably in favor of having to remove this. I thank Ms. Kennedy for going back and doing the additional work to make us satisfied in that respect. I think I'll just restate what I said the first time this came to us, in that this is an upsetting decision, in that this house should never have been built the way it was built, with the specifications that are required for protecting trees. The pictures they've shown us, it is obvious this should not have been built that way. And the first people who looked at it even warned this person not to live there because of the assessment they had about the way this developer chose to build that house. And rather than nobody buying this house, thus all of the costs and the consequences of building an unlivable dwelling would have fallen on the developer for their poor choice, now the consequences are falling on the public. Mostly on the public, in that our job was to put those regulations in place so that we maintain a tree cover, because it's necessary, as Councillor Fallett pointed out earlier, to make our environment actually livable going forward. And so we're stuck with having to make a decision where the public is now going to lose a very important feature, not just here, but in every of these decisions we make to remove trees, because of what people are being allowed to do and not bear the consequences for. And when I look at the two conflicting arborist reports, which is again something we're having more and more frequently, and I think that the problem is that our arborist he works for the town. His job description is to maintain the tree canopy on behalf of the public for the public good. And the job of a consulting arborist who is hired by an individual is to look out for the individual good. And the way our society has chosen to make legal to build our dwellings is in such a way that those two things are always going to be in opposition, which is seemingly starkly unresolvable now. The next consultant has actually got in their disclosure statement at the bottom here, trees can be managed, but they cannot be controlled. The only way to eliminate all risk is to eliminate all trees, which I thought was a very honest statement. And so I regret that we are having to remove a tree. It is unhealthy, I'm sure of that. Whether it's any more unhealthy than many of the other trees in our town, I also believe our arborist, it probably isn't. On the main, our tree canopy is very unhealthy because of the way we have chosen to build over the last 50 years. So I regret that we're going to probably see more decisions like this, and I hope that another tree can be found on this lot that will help Miss Kennedy remain cool, though not have the same problems with branches tapping her roof as we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I echo a lot of the points that have been made by previous councillors. I look at where the tree's situated and like, how did we ever, but that's what happens. And that's what we need to, going forward, we need to work with developers and design properties that incorporate the trees that exist there. And I think that's hopefully something we can do going forward. It's an unfortunate circumstance. As I spoke to earlier, the cypress tree, you know, we need the trees. I mean, if nothing has shown us lately, we need the trees. They're so critically important to making our spaces and that our town livable. So, you know, I initially, when this first came forward, was thinking, yeah, probably we should you know, keep the tree. But the thing that I take into consideration with all of these kind of applications is the person and their ability to live in their home. And I can tell from the intonation in her letters that she's frightened. And as somebody who represents her, I have to take that as something very serious. And I have to consider her ability to not feel frightened in her own home, and not being there, not being able to see the pull test or how the tree reacts to winds. I mean, I'm assuming she's telling the truth. I mean, it comes across that what she's seeing is frightening her. And I think it's given everything she's done, that we need to support her through this. So I will support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. And I do support the comments from colleagues. And I'll call the question. All in favour? And none opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll turn to item 13B, which is another tree removal request of a Douglas fir tree at 10486 Jocelyn Place. We have a report from staff. We did receive some additional information, which council has had an opportunity to review. And I will turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this tree, a Douglas fir tree, is situated very close to this individual driveway and the residential utility corridor. It appears that the tree has contributed to some of the driveway damage that is at this property, and the property owner also has concerns about it damaging the utility corridor. Staff don't typically allow tree removals for future risk to utilities. There are many trees around Sidney on top of utility corridors, and we don't remove them unless we have to replace the utility underneath for some reason. As well, the property owner submitted a structural engineering report that identified the driveway as a non-structural concrete driveway. They mentioned that there's a hairline fracture in the garage structure as well. However, they didn't. That wasn't confirmed by the structural engineer. yeah, at this point, there's not sufficient information for staff to approve it. It's not an imminent hazard, and it's not causing structural damage to the house. So we're recommending that the tree application be denied.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues for any questions. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Clary, I know this is not your department, but do you have a ballpark age of the house when it was built?
I don't have that handy. I can try to look it up though. I'm not sure if Allison or Corey have that information more readily available.
I could look that up and provide that information in a couple minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't think about asking this sooner, so I didn't mean to put staff on the spot, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from staff? Or for staff, sorry. We'll just wait a moment for that answer.
Mr. Mayor, BC assessment says the house was built in 1981.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you.
And thank you to staff for taking the question. So we have no further discussion. We do have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that the application to remove a Douglas fir tree at 10486 Jocelyn Place be denied.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Discussion. Turn to the mover. Seconder.
Thank you. Just a short comment. When I took a look at the property and looked at the damage on the driveway, it appeared reasonably minimal. And so that was one of the reasons I wanted to have sort of a estimate of when the house was built, because this is now, what are we looking at, 40 years. And I think for that amount of damage in 40 years, that doesn't seem to be something that I would see as a big problem. I'm sure that the homeowner has a different opinion about what the driveway looks, but I don't see this, that the tree is negatively impacting the integrity of the property. So I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe and then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. When I looked at the arborist report, they say that there's extensive infrastructure damage that has occurred due to the tree's position. Doesn't seem to be, I don't see that in the pictures. There's some cracks in the driveway that might be caused by the tree, but it doesn't seem to be, it might be unsightly, but it doesn't seem to be that significant. Also, the flooding that they mentioned is not necessarily attributed to the tree. So I don't see a reason at this time to take it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe made most of my points. I would just say that I have the same flooding problem at the front of my house, and it's not anywhere near a tree. And I would say it's probably what staff's assessment is simply that this is a matter of settlement and the way the fill was put in. This is the land of clay. That's what SEAG means after all. We've got a lot of shrink swell going on and things are going to shift around. So I see that if the property owner is going to regrade that driveway and fix that, I think that would probably fix all of the problems that have shown up that are being attributed to the tree, but I'm not entirely certain that they are. So for that reason, that's why I would deny that at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just, sorry, Mr. Mayor, a question back to staff. If the homeowner decides to go ahead and redo their driveway anyways, am I correct in presuming that they would have to take measures to protect the root base of the tree, or is that something staff would make as a condition of if they went ahead anyways to do their driveway?
I'll turn to staff.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe. My understanding is that a driveway repair wouldn't have much staff involvement. However, if it resulted in the death of the tree, we could then have legal action against the homeowner. However, it's not, my understanding is it's not typical for us to review a driveway repair project. I'm not sure if Ms. Verhagen has any other additional information about that.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Clary. Through the mayor to council, that's correct. There is no town involvement in the repair of a driveway or resurfacing. We would only be involved if the applicant or the property owner was proposing to increase the size of their driveway or change their access onto the road.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. I do have some remarks. I met with the applicant at their invitation over the weekend, and the concern I have is I support staff with regards to the potential impact of trees on utilities and how that is a factor across the municipality. But in visiting the location, the tree is immediately adjacent to the driveway, as we can see in the picture. And as was provided in some of the additional information today, the upheaval is approximately 6 inches of this concrete driveway, which has led to extensive cracking, and further cracking may be a result of other factors, for example, water getting in the initial crack. However, it, as was in the first information that was provided, that this is creating flooding in what are referred to as the first 2 panels immediately or closest to the garage door, and does impact access to the front entrance of the house. And so when I look at the slabs being removed and what root structure may or may not have to be removed, and one of the arborist photographs with arrows on it indicates that these roots will certainly go under the first and second panel, but may very well go under the third panel, is that to regrade the driveway, that is to reduce the 6-foot heaving and to go back down and put a base, is how much root structure will be lost that may have a consequence on the health of the tree. That's not something that can be determined looking at it today. A question I posed through to staff and would open it to further comment from Ms. Clary, is that additional information on the impact to the tree, I believe, may become evident or could become evident once the slabs are removed and once excavation is then planned and the root structure may be better understood underneath the driveway. So it's just not that, you can just go re-level it. You're only going to be able to regrade the driveway, this portion of the driveway, by reducing, by taking out roots and reducing the grade. So my question, I guess, through to staff is that while we have heard, and thank you for the questions from colleagues, that staff would not normally be involved in an application of this sort, is could we arrange through discussions with the applicant to have an arborist on site, whether staff would recommend that the town arborist could be present, or that the applicant should have their independent arborist in attendance, and that further information may be available with regards to this application. The applicant has indicated in today's information that they have a quote for $10,000, and that quote has indicated that is the costs may in fact be higher because of the necessary action taken with regards to the roots and regrading of the driveway. And I understand the applicant's concern that they could spend that $10,000 or more, but that this tree will likely continue to heave. Over what period of time is again uncertain, but could be facing either an unhealthy tree and have to go through the process again, or facing additional costs everyone, including the property owner who is very passionate about trees and has many other mature trees on the property, would like to try and retain this tree. But I would look to staff if they could comment on staff involvement, or sorry, on an arborist involvement in this particular application, which normally wouldn't be occur.
Through to the mayor, typically the town's arborist would not, they may oversee a private third-party arborist to do this type of work, but we would expect the property owner to have their own arborist on site, and arborist might stop by to check up on things, but they wouldn't be directing the work at all on private property.
Okay. Could we have a staff comment on if we approve the motion to deny, whether it would be reasonable to recommend? No, sorry, I'm going to withdraw that. The applicant can make their decision. Another question through to staff is what is the cost of an application for tree removal, or what would have been the cost for this application to the applicant?
Through to the mayor, I believe the cost is $250 for the application, plus I would have to look at the revised bylaw, but it's either 2 or 3 replacement trees. If those are planted on property, we take it's a $750 deposit per tree, which is returned to the applicant after the tree is established. If the applicant doesn't plant those on their tree, it's a $750 non-refundable fee to the town for each tree replacement for the town to plant on public property.
Thank you. My last comment is that the applicant has indicated that because of the flooding and because of the cracks in the driveway that will only make the situation worse, remedial action does need to occur. So the applicant will proceed. I guess I have some concern that that if we deny the request, that that if she chooses to have an arborist attend or a town arborist attends and additional information is provided such that there would be a reconsideration of the decision, it would be through a brand new application, and which comes at additional cost. So I'm on both sides of this, but those are my comments. Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any further discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you to staff for the information. I'll turn to now to item 13C, which is Mermaid Creek background and options report from staff. This follows presentations from Peninsula Stream and the Roberts Bay residents previously, and to council, and also several speakers during public participation this evening. I would turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you. So as you mentioned, this report is a result of the resolution made on May 25th, 2021. The information on Mermaid Creek is based on historical knowledge of the creek and also aerial photos of Sidney. It appears that the creek had fill added between 1969 and 1980, and that's in line with historical knowledge that town staff have. At this point, the town recommends that a sign be installed to prohibit access along the path. It will be challenging to enforce this sign, but we worked with the community group on the wording, and we'll continue to work with stewardship groups as they come forward for other improvements to the creek area.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, we do have recommendations.
I'll move the staff recommendation that staff install signage at the access points to the trail as described in the June 22nd, 2021 Mermaid Creek staff report.
Second.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Discussion, Councillor Fallon? No. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make some comments in regards to some of the comments we heard in public participation and the correspondence. First of all, I was very appreciative of the tours provided by citizens in the area around the creek, and then our staff as well, who sort of rounded out a bit more history of the area. And the big takeaways for me were actually a lot of things that were brought up in the correspondence, is that it's a very complex issue. And so when you talk about restoring streams or habitats to their original or natural state, it sounds like that can be a relative sort of thing. Like to what state, like how long ago? And we had information that a lot of the banks that are being eroded now is actually material that was dumped there during construction years ago. So for me, I hear from the community that I think they want us to do more on this, and that they're maybe not completely happy with just the placement of the sign. But my understanding was we went to staff to ask them not to do a full and comprehensive evaluation of what was going on with Mermaid Creek and the surrounding area, but what are some short-term fixes that we could do to help minimize? And so putting up a sign was that. I agree with the comments made tonight that it's complex, and I think it's something we'll want to look at more in the future, along with all the other environmentally sensitive areas we have. We've got work to do at Ray Creek. We've got a lot of other projects on the go, our parks master plan. So I think there's still work to be done there. And my understanding is that we will consider perhaps further action on this in the future, and along with other types of environmental priorities as well. So I'm in favor of the motion as a first step, at least, to having a sign there to help mitigate the issue somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question that just popped in my mind to staff. Approximately, when you mentioned there's gate access for some of the residents who live along there, approximately how many homes are we talking about?
I can answer that because I looked at an aerial photograph myself this evening, and there are 9 or 10. I couldn't confirm that all have back gates, but I know many of them do.
I just wonder if it's something as simple as perhaps, I know it wouldn't be too onerous for staff to send a mail out to the homes that border it, just with the bylaw information, because we have a sign that doesn't actually speak specifically to the bylaw. And people may not be aware that it is in our bylaw that there's no public access. And I'm thinking in terms of the people that might access it daily or routinely and they live there, this is a gentle, friendly reminder, if that's a possibility.
I'll take that as a question through to staff.
Yeah, yes, please.
Through to Councillor Garnett, that's definitely a possibility. We were actually out there again today. There's about 4 properties at the top end of it that really have the water. So, however, it'd be very challenging to require those property owners not to use that trail. There may be legal implications that I'm not even aware of as far as their access to the waterfront. So there need to be quite a bit of work before we required those property owners actually not to use their gates.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll next turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I have many of the reservations that were expressed by the other scientists who called in today. The stream as it exists is below its natural grade, which is very obvious from the air photos. This used to be meandering alluvial stream. And when we walked on that site, you can tell that that is the original sediment that was deposited there by a meandering stream. It was not dumped there. And I don't even know how they would have done it. That's a lot of sediment. And it's, in fact, it's silverweed that is growing over most of it, which is the native shoreline plant. I have no doubt that the property owners have been dumping things over the fence because some of their construction materials from their personal construction projects for their homes were being stored on the public property on the other side of the fence. And as noted, they have been altering this area, which is part of a park, it's part of the commons, and using it for their own personal uses. And the main alteration to this river channel was in fact a private resident who had dredged out material so that he could park his own private boat there. Many of the structures in this stream are from other property owners in the past who had done that. And so I'm appreciating the science, and of course was suggesting that they happen, because I think letting people know and having the Roberts Bay Group put these up there to let people know this is not actually private property. This is in fact a commons. This is in fact a high value, or was, ecological site, and it needs to be respected as such. And I am really appreciative of Councillor Garnett's suggestion. I would say actually probably we should just get the contents of that sign sent out to those landowners so that they understand they have the same obligations for use and protection of this site that the rest of us are going to be expected to follow with regards to the access there. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to move forward on this, and I appreciate letter writer Curtis Evans' point that the conditions, you know, as we say, like the conditions of how that stream used to work, it doesn't matter anymore because we can't possibly recreate them. We would have to buy back those properties, we would have to dig up that stream, we would have to redivert stormwater that's currently being shunted all throughout the system back into that stream. And it's not going to happen. So what we need to do is try to create, based on the conditions that are currently there. And so being able to work with Peninsula Streams and the Roberts Bay Group to kind of think about what that would be, I think would be a good idea. And trying to base it off of what was there before is simply going to be unworkable because the natural conditions for that are no longer there. This is a channelized, deeply incised cut. And there's not much else we can do about it without much bigger alterations.
Thank you, Councillor. I turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll agree with most of Councillor Duncan's comments. And the one thing I'd add to it, as an additional reason for we can't put it back to the way it was, is sea level rise. Because that in itself is going to prevent us from putting back what used to be there. So I think the actions that are being proposed are reasonable. And when this particular motion ends, I'm going to actually make a motion that we refer the restoration of Mermaid Creek Estuary to our strategic planning in the fall and have a discussion about it, because it's a pretty significant undertaking if we want to do it. It will have budget implications, and that's the right time to talk about it.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? So we have it moved and seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
I'd like to move that we refer restoration of the Mermaid Creek Estuary to strategic planning in the fall.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'll just turn to Councillor Garnett. Colleagues commented on your suggestion, and there would be an opportunity for amendment if you so chose. With regards to your consideration?
I'd be willing. I'm just not sure if staff feels, I was kind of getting a sense that it might be a little onerous, so.
I'll turn back to staff if that...
Yeah, I think Ms. Clary indicated that that it's certainly feasible to be able to do that if that's council's wish.
Okay. Sure. I'll make a friendly amendment there that...
well, sorry, it'll be a new motion.
Sorry, a new motion.
That's okay.
Yeah. I'll make a motion to send letters, including the official bylaw, to residents who live along the Mermaid Creek.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you to staff, and thank you to the residents and organizations involved. We'll turn to 14, correspondence, and we do have a report from the Sidney. I'm sorry, it is on my agenda. It's penciled in. Thank you. Item 13D, which we did refer as an additional item this evening, and we have a report from our CEO, Mr. Humble, on proposed staff changes, and I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the intent of this report is to bring forward for Council's consideration the potential addition of 2 new regular full-time exempt positions, one being a manager of corporate communications and community services, and another being a manager of human resources. It's noted in the report, and it's being recommended that the recruitment of the manager of corporate communications and community services occur immediately, and that the manager of human resources position be referred to the 2022 budget deliberations for consideration next year. Regarding the communications position and why it might be deemed necessary immediately, with the recent departure of the executive assistant and communications coordinator, a significant gap now exists within the organization. And this is due to the fact that the job description for the EA position has been modified to revert back to what might be deemed more traditional executive assistant duties. Aspects of the EA duties that were removed with the addition of the communication coordinator aspect to the position that occurred in 2017 would now be placed back with respect to that position. And in doing so, and for a number of reasons cited in the report, it's felt that a dedicated communications position that focuses not just on communications but community engagement as well as community services is now being deemed essential to the organization, at least from a staff perspective. Expectations regarding appropriate levels of communication, citizen engagement, and accountability are at an all-time high for local governments. We are witnessing an increased demand from the public to be more involved in local government issues, and the complexity of issues facing local governments, such as environmental, social, and cultural, has also increased substantially in more recent years. All of this has been intensified by the ever-growing increase in the use of technology, as well as the evolution of social media within local government. Staff fully understand that the flow of communication and information that is produced by the town and distributed to our citizens is expected to be timely, accurate, open, and trustworthy. The bottom line is that it's becoming increasingly challenging for staff to be able to provide the expected level of communication and engagement off the sides of their desk. The staff report provides additional detailed factors that further illustrate the need for this particular position. In terms of the benefits to the organization, for staff, it would provide much needed assistance in managing external communications. It would also provide a leadership role in coordinating and assisting with all levels of community engagement for the town. For council, it would better ensure that their strategic priorities are being achieved, allowing for increased communication, transparency, and engagement with our community and citizens. The benefit for the community is that it would ensure that citizens in various groups and organizations within our community are receiving a higher level of service in the form of more accurate and timely information. And staff certainly understand that with this particular position, as well as consideration for the HR manager, comes fairly significant financial impacts. It's expected that the salary range for a manager of corporate communications and community services position will range between $100,000 to $110,000 a year, plus benefits. So this annual salary amount equates to a tax requirement impact of roughly 1%. It is anticipated that the position would be a similar pay grade to that of the communications position. If council approves the communications position for this year, recruitment would begin immediately with a successful candidate to begin possibly in September. And this would equate to 4 months of salary for the remainder of 2021, or roughly $43,000. And this may be funded from surplus for 2021. So staff certainly understand as I said, the impact of this. It's not something that we take lightly. When the executive assistant left the organization, and like when any position leaves, we look at these as opportunities to reflect on what the requirements might be for the organization. So we did the same thing at that particular time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Humble, and I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. We do have a recommendation from staff. Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll move the recommendation, the first recommendation, that the new exempt position of Manager of Communications and Community Services be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor of this. In this era of fake and questionable news, I think it's just a fact of life that we have to expend more effort to make sure that our citizens are getting timely and accurate information. There's a number of social media sites that I monitor around Sidney, and there's a lot of misinformation that gets circulated out there. So I like the notion that we would have somebody that would be taking a more strategic view. Also, I think there's a lot of time spent by our management staff responding to requests for information. This takes them away from delivering our strategic priorities. I'm hoping that this position might save us money in terms of being able to do community engagement in-house without having to hire consultants. There things that we've struggled with are doing surveys. We had a survey that we needed to get done for COVID, the business survey. There was another survey done for the EOC. We've talked also about doing another survey, a follow-up survey for the business community. And I think somewhere in our strategic plan was an idea to do a survey of our citizens to get some feedback. I think there's a lot of time, as I said, for our corporate managers spent on these sort of things. And I'd rather see them be able to focus their time on strategic priorities. So I'm in favor of this position.
Thank you, Councillor T. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll just concur. I agree with much of what Councillor. To me, it provides an excellent opportunity, as the CEO pointed out, to revisit the staff structure at this time, given the vacancy that has come to place. I've often felt, given the volume of tasks that staff have before them, that we can be quite reactionary to matters as opposed to strategic, as Councillor O'Keefe suggests, or proactive. And so I'm delighted at the suggestion to have someone take on this role and these responsibilities. In particular, the timeline that the CEO has suggested is important, I think, as we move forward with the OCP process and as we come to a stage, hopefully, with Beacon Wharf and looking for some engagement with the public on that matter as well. So I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I'm just sort of looking at it from the financial aspect of it, and we approve it, then it's this part of the year, but then it's into next year's budget. It's there. So, and then we're talking about a second possible position. And my hesitance around it is the fact that we're not out of this pandemic yet. Just heard Dr. Tam last week say she expects a spike in September. Hopefully that doesn't happen. We can be cautiously optimistic. We don't know what our financial situation is going into next year. We're going to be kind of going in blind. Based on forecasts from last year's financial budget, 21 to 25, we were starting off in pretty rough shape next year, and what we were going to begin with as a starting point. So I'm a little concerned that if we start spending money ahead of that, not knowing what we're dealing with when we get there. I have real reservations around that aspect of it. I was actually hoping to push it to strategic planning and budget deliberations for both of them. But at that point, we would have a better idea of where we stand and a better feel for whether or not it's something we can manage, given the percentages that have been mentioned. And I also look at in our community, and we have people we've had businesses and people furloughed, businesses closed, people suffering and financially, and I do worry a little bit about the optics. I have to be honest. Hiring people, exempt staff at higher salaries than what most people make, and how that impacts and how it would look to people that are struggling in our community. But mostly, I'm really concerned about what we're facing next year in terms of budget discussions, and this is potentially $250,000 at the bottom end for both positions, which is significant. That's over 2%, and just something we need to keep in consideration. So I won't support this particular one, but I do support the second one, and I would rather see them rolled into to the same thing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Further discussion, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Rintoul's comments about the merits of getting this in place early. For the OCP, certainly we're looking for a lot of engagement, but we did invest in in Modus doing that for us with staff support. So that one maybe you can argue we've got covered, but we're going to have a lot of engagement that we need to do over Beacon Wharf and the options for that. And I guess those of us on the committee maybe are a bit closer to the scope of what that engagement's going to be. We know that we're going to have to do quite a bit of engagement as we start talking about climate adaptation and what we do along our waterfront. We've just heard about the need to get the word out about Roberts Bay, Mermaid Creek, the estuary, and its importance. We've also had Peninsula Streams talking to us about the importance of the sand beach spawning of forage fish that are important to the ecology. We've got a lot of stuff that we'd like to be communicating, and we have way more correspondence coming in than we did, say, 5 years ago. I think that you can reasonably argue that there is a pressing need for this position to be in place early rather than waiting. I don't see that we're talking about approving $250,000 now, because half of that is the other position, and we'll be talking about that in the fall. We're not looking at approving that now. But I do see the merit in getting this one in place. And if it turns out that the situation is financially dire and that COVID is massively worse than we're kind of predicting at this point, then we consider doing some layoffs if we need to. But I'm comfortable. We've got a need for this now. I think we should do it.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much. Councillor Scott, or Councillor Garnett brings up some important conversation regarding our budget and where we're going forward, where we've come from, and not knowing what the future holds for us. And I think we need to be very, very mindful. And I'm not suggesting that staff isn't being mindful. I just want to be really clear. That's not where I'm coming at from this perspective. But we do need to look at what we're going, and we know that every year when we look at the budget process and we see the percentages that are there, and we sit down at the table and we say, we need to start shaving some things off of there. So now we're already going into it knowing that our next budget is automatically going to have an uptick. Having said all that, I think looking at hiring someone to do our communications full-time is an important thing. It's something that I remember coming through from the last term about how important it was looking at communication and what comes out. And our town is busy and we have a lot on the agenda. And it's better to get the message out right the first time than to have to start fixing things because the message didn't come out right. Or if somebody jumped the gun and portrayed it in a way that wasn't appropriate. So I'm going to support it, but I'm also going to say that I am conscientious, very conscientious, and as I think the rest of council is, that this is going to cost our community, but I believe it's a good investment, so I will support it on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. I'll make some brief comments. I want to thank Mr. Humble for bringing this forward. I won't repeat what I think were very many strong points in the rationale provided, and similarly with additional points made by colleagues in support of this. As one who has now worked with the Chief Administrative Officer and the Executive Assistant for 2.5 years, I think there is an urgent need for this position. I think the rationale is strong. And to comment on budget, I think our council has been very mindful, as staff have in their presentation of their budgets to us over the first 3 years, of financial prudence. And I believe we've faced 2 very difficult years, budgeting years through this pandemic, and I think we've come out very strong, and I think we're in a strong financial position. Not that this won't have impacts, but I think when we put it in line with all of the priorities that we review during budget time, that this would remain a high priority, and to, in particular, Councillor Wainwright and Councillor Rintoul, I think that the timing of this is very appropriate given the number of initiatives that the town is involved with that involve not only communication but engagement. And so I thank staff and I support the CAO and the entire senior management that support this recommendation. And those are my comments. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Councillor Wainwright.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just a bit of an afterthought for staff. Would it be appropriate, like if this motion passes, it's approving the new position, but would it be appropriate for us also as part of that motion to approve funding from surplus for filling the position in 2021?
We have a thumbs up from Mr. Hissick, Councillor.
Okay, so I'd like to propose an amendment that we, at the end of that motion, that we add, and that the recruitment and cost of the position for the remainder of 2021 be funded out of surplus to a maximum of $50,000.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
We have it seconded. Any discussion? Calling the question on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. We have the main amended motion on the table. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. Thank you. We do have a second recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe?
Sure. I'll move that the proposed manager of human resources position be brought forward to consideration as part of strategic planning and budget deliberations.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we'll turn to 14, correspondence. We do have one item, and it is a report from the Sidney Event Advisory Group. That's their 2021 activity report, and we do have a recommendation.
I'll move receipt for information.
Second.
We have that moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you to SEAG, or the BIA, I guess, for the report. There was some additional information, though, that I'd like from the report. So when I looked at the MOU, it talks about providing also information. I'd like to know how the funds that we provide to the SBIA for the SEAG function have been utilized. So I believe we allocate about $10,000, and then there's another amount, so it's close to $20,000 that they receive every year. I think that's for the event supplement. And my understanding was that this was partly because the town did not have staff to run events, and so we provided this funds to the SBIA to organize Town of Sidney events on our behalf. Some of those things that they've done on our behalf was the Lego Festival, the Comic Con, Treat Street, Skateboard Festival, and a few other things. However, so the Comic Con isn't, there was $5,000 allocated for that, but that isn't taking place anymore. Treat Street is now run by Peninsula Celebrations. The Lego event is run by the Sidney Museum, and I don't think I've seen the skateboard festival for a few years. So I think what the MOU calls for is, if they don't use the amounts, that those would come back to the town, or if they want to carry that over to the coming year, they may do so if they have a plan on how they're going to use that, and council can consider that. So I guess what I was hoping is perhaps our liaison, Councillor Duncan, could get a bit more information from them in terms of how our funds were expended last year, and if they weren't, as I expect they weren't because there was no events, their request to whether they want to refund that to us or whether they have plans that they would use that in 2021. And if they are going to use it in 2021, how that might be used, or are they looking for ideas from us in terms of how to do that? The other thing that we had, the MOU calls for, is providing statistics and metrics. One thing the SBIA had talked about providing under the SEAG activity report was not only event statistics, which didn't happen last year, but at least information from the PED counters. So we would get an idea of what the traffic has been like in the downtown area. So I guess just a request that we might be able to have some additional information as part of the report. Thank you.
Sorry, are you making a motion, Councillor O'Keefe, or?
Well, I don't know if I really need to have a motion. It's information that's in the MOU that is to be provided. So I didn't know if it was something that Councillor Duncan as liaison can just go back and ask for the information, or whether you actually need a motion to do that.
If I might make a suggestion, Councillor O'Keefe, the town provides its grants under the MOU with the Sidney BIA. And the Sidney BIA will provide its reports to council, generally on an annual basis. And SEAG is a separate construct. It does have its own MOU. But as I say, the BIA is accountable for the expenditure of funds. So I think we could certainly communicate to the BIA that in their next report that they provide information on the accountability of the grants, rather than going to SEAG, which is a body involving not only the BIA, but as we know, 14 or 15 other community organizations.
So the reason I brought it up tonight is because I did ask that question to staff back in February, because there was information that came from the BIA in the annual report, and I asked all those specific questions. And at that time, I was told that it wasn't appropriate at that time to ask that information of the SBIA, and that would, staff informed me that it would be provided in the SEAG report. So that's why I was looking for it in the SEAG report this week, and I didn't see it. So maybe some clarification from staff in terms of the best route to go, because this is what I was advised back in February.
Okay, if I can just make a comment before going to staff. This is the 2021 biannual report. If we had a previous report from the BIA earlier this year, it would have been with regards to 2020. I wouldn't want to go back and request additional information for 2020. My suggestion would be that when the BIA is reporting out to council with regards to 2021, that the information you're suggesting, which I support much of it, could come forth at that time.
I guess what my issue is, I think we should be entitled to know how our money was utilized or not in 2020. And if they, under the MOU, if the monies were not used, then they have the option to carry it. They can request from council that they carry it forward to 2021. So I'm looking for a bit of accountability in terms of we're allocating taxpayers' money for a certain function. If those events didn't take place that year, that's understandable. But what are their plans? Are they wanting to carry that forward, that money forward to 2021? And what will their plans be to expend that money in 2021?
I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through yourself to Councillor O'Keefe. So staff will. So we've heard what you're saying, certainly, and rather than asking Councillor Duncan to follow up with SEAG, staff will reach out directly to the BIA and make the request regarding the SEAG information directly, and we'll report back to council regarding it.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Humble.
that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we do have the motion to receive on the floor. Any further discussion?
Move receipt for information.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. I'll turn to item 15. We have a correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. We have no notice of motion, motion to go in camera this evening. I'll look for motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved in second. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you very much, council. Thank you to staff, and thank you to members of the public for tuning in this evening. Everyone have a good evening and stay safe. Thank you.